Hey guys, how you doing? I've had quite a few people reach out to me privately and saying that they like the longer form videos that I'm doing about my experience in the art and stuff like that. So when I get a few minutes, I'll endeavour to come up with something interesting that you might like, and some water for my dry throat. So I thought I'd start with where it began for me in Jiu Jitsu, and really the story of me starting Jiu Jitsu has to start with me doing Aikido. And it seems kind of unlikely these days, but um, yeah, I mean, Steven Seagal was kind of big back then and stuff like that. I've done a lot of other martial arts, and I can't quite remember what kind of piqued my interest other than the Seagal movies. But my dad had always had this attitude and told me, like, don't be blind to things, right? So like, don't just write a whole martial art off just because there's something about it that you don't like. Yeah, there's always something inherently amazing and awesome to learn in every martial art. So he said, don't be blinded by any art. And because I would be doing like karate when I was a kid, or judo, and I'd be obsessed with it, and dad would just keep saying, like, think outside of that, like he was very into boxing, very into judo. So that kind of covered most of the military kind of stuff that you would want to do anyway. But so my Aikido coach, I'd been doing Aikido for a couple of years, but it was like 6 or 8 hours a day, every day kind of stuff. I was pretty obsessed with it. And he was like, I'm guessing like 100 kilos, kind of like 5'9" or 8" or something. Real stocky, chunky kind of guy. Not the sort of person you'd normally associate with Aikido. Massive wrists, really thick hands. And we shared the dojo with the judo dojo. So there was a very Japanesey kind of vibe about the whole place. And sometimes on Fridays, some of the judo guys, they always had like some pretty high level Japanese guys in there, and they would come in and do Aikido with us and stuff like that. And on Friday nights, we'd kind of wrestle each other standing. Some of the guys, there was like this pub sumo thing going on in New Zealand for a while. Not those big dumpy suits, but like real sumo wrestling in one of those weird loincloth things, and in pubs. And guys would be throwing each other all over the bar doing this stuff. It was kind of mad looking back at it. I don't think there was any mats or there might have probably mats. I don't remember there being mats on the ground. And everyone just kind of push all the chairs and tables back in the middle of a pub, and guys would put on these I should know the name of it, one of those loin things, and throw each other around these bars. It was pretty hilarious. So anyway, these guys were training for that. They were taking that pretty seriously, right? Which was kind of funny. Because we'd go along to the bars with them where they were having these things, and the judo guys would throw people all over the place. It was pretty funny. So anyway, I'd done judo before, obviously, and so sometimes I'd do some judo classes. And then I got involved with these Japanese guys on Friday nights, and we'd wear these silly loincloth things and sumo each other around the tatami and stuff like that, which was pretty funny. And then there was like some sort of a national sumo championship, and I should know the name. It escapes me. One of the biggest sumo wrestlers from Hawaii that ever lived. Man, why can't I remember it? Anyway, huge guy. He was real famous, and he was going around the country promoting sumo, which was just very odd. But so anyway, there was going to be some sort of a national tournament, and so we started training for it with these Japanese guys, and we went in it. It was kind of crazy. But anyway, it got me onto the idea of kind of like wrestling a little bit and stuff like that. And it was my Aikido coach who said, Rob, you should go look at Jiu Jitsu. Because like back then I was like 90, 98 kilos, you know, like heavily muscled from all my downhill racing and stuff like that. And I was like, I wasn't the typical kind of Aikido student looking, you know, I was super athletic. And so I took his advice and I went, okay, well, I'll go and have a look at that then. And so I grabbed a very good friend of mine, you know, an ex-pro boxer friend of mine, and we went to a few different jiu-jitsu clubs and we got into fights at both of them, right? With the coaches, and it was a bit of a bloody mess. And then we ended up going along to the Academy of Combat, which was the third jiu-jitsu place at the time, right? This is like 97. And so we came in like shirts torn and stuff like that. And we just said, you know, if you guys can't fight, just let us know, because the other places we'd been to, we weren't impressed by. And so he calls over a couple of the beginners, and they just beat the hell out of us. And he just said, do whatever you want to these guys. And they literally just took us down, choked us out, took us down, choked us out, took us down, armbarred us. And we were just like, I was in shock, right? And we were kind of taking turns laughing at the other person, because like I went first and I just got taken down and choked. And then I got up not knowing what had happened to me. And Matt was laughing at me. Well, you have a go then. And Matt went for it, and then this little guy just shot in all around his legs, took him down, took us back, choked him out, and then I could laugh at Matt. So that was our introduction. And then I tell all my students this, that it was quite a humbling experience for me, and I was not a humble person, right? And I went home, and I always have short showers. Mum used to time our showers, so you'll ask my wife, I'm like in and out of the shower in like 30 seconds flat. So I went home and I remember just having this like meltdown. I just sat in the shower, in the floor, you know, and just cried for like 2 hours. It's like all the walls came down, and I was like, I've been doing martial arts really seriously since I was very young. You know, I've been doing door work for years, had heaps of fights, competed in lots of different martial arts, won most things, you know, and considered myself a pretty decent fighter. And with a bit of judo, like I could kind of throw and stuff like that, but these guys were not we weren't in gis, they weren't kind of trying to throw me like a traditional judo guy would. They like wrestled my legs and stuff, and I wasn't used to that. So it was pretty different, and I'd never had like punching and kicking and wrestling all together before, right? So I'd either be doing karate or kickboxing, something like that, or I'd be doing judo and aikido and like grappling kind of stuff. I'd never really had the two together. So when somebody was, you know, faking at my head, and I was instantly protecting myself and not even thinking about my legs, and then somebody tackling me to the ground, like I'd never had to deal with both of them at the same time before, and that was a bit of a shock. So yeah, I remember getting up the next morning and going around to Matt, and he's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going straight back. And he's like, you're mad? I'm like, well, they kicked our ass. The least I want to do is have another crack at them. So went back again and started the next morning, and that was it. You know, I literally said to the coach the next morning, that's Jeff Aiken, who's passed away over COVID, unfortunately. Along with a few people that I know very well who are very fit and healthy and look after themselves very well. So that aside, and Jeff was surprised. He said, I'm surprised to see you guys after the belting you got last night. I'm like, nah, like I'm going to be here until I start beating you and all the rest of the guys, and then I'm going to leave and go do something else. And so it was literally training all day. I'd get there at like 10 in the morning. I'd get a bag of muffins that were on special from the bakery across the road that opened at like, I'm guessing 6 or whatever. So I'd always get like this big bag of discounted muffins, $2 bag of muffins, a big bottle of Coke or Fanta or something like that for a whole bunch of sugar. And that'd be it pretty much all day. I'd just go in there, do every class, Thai boxing, Jiu Jitsu. Like our Jiu Jitsu was like, sometimes it was just with a gi without striking. Sometimes it was with a gi with striking. Sometimes it was like modern MMA. We called it Vale Tudo back then because the term MMA didn't exist. And so we would headbutt each other and elbow each other, and we would fight with no rules, basically. No biting, no eye gouging, everything else went. And so, because that's what we'd kind of seen in some videos from Brazil and stuff like this, and it kind of reflected what the early UFC was about, and so we didn't have gloves or anything like that. Another reason why my hands are all messed up is from punching people in the head, even at close range when you can be really accurate, still hurts your hands a lot, right? So you start elbowing people and you still get bone chips. I've still got bone chips floating around in my elbows from hitting people in the head. Or sometimes you miss. You go to hit them in the head and you crack them in the elbow or something else, So it was very, very hard training. There weren't a lot of guys. It was a giant Thai boxing gym primarily, and they did a lot of weapon stuff, Filipino things. And so their logo was kind of this triple thing where it was like kicking, weapons, and jiu-jitsu. So they considered you had to be able to do all three. So they had this term they called shoot fighting. So you could get a shoot fighting belt, but your jiu-jitsu was kind of like a shoot fighting belt also, right? And I didn't know any of this. We're bloody at the bottom of the world here. We're isolated. So like we just take whatever the coach says is gospel, right? But he was traveling around the world going to microbiology conferences and stuff like that and picking up techniques. He was a really smart, super dedicated martial artist. So he would come back, show us all the new moves. We had a curriculum and, as new techniques, as he learnt new techniques, he would bring them back and they'd go into our curriculum. And so we didn't have a lot. We maybe had 25 techniques or 30 techniques. So we drilled a lot of really basic stuff a lot. And so, yeah, we just used to beat the absolute snot out of each other. And then Friday nights was usually fight night. So you could, you could put your name up on a board, fight on Friday, whether it be Thai boxing or Jiu-Jitsu or MMA or whatever you wanted. So that was pretty cool. All the guys would pull all the plastic seats around. Out would come the beers. Half the school would be there, like cheering on whoever they were supporting, or you just go along and, have a good time. That was pretty cool. And so that's kind of what the start was like. But it was very hard, super, super hard training. There were no like easy days. Every day was hardcore fighting. And, it was pretty full on compared to today's schools where, and I mean, sure, the way I walked into the school was super arrogant. I was really, upset at what had happened earlier in the night with the other two, like, Japanese jiu-jitsu schools. And, yeah, I was just like, I guess also I was a product of my dad. And he always said, like, if you can beat the coach, then why are you there? You've learnt all you can. I mean, that's old school mentality, of course. But that's where it came from in the military, was like, fight the guy who'll kick your ass, shows that he's better, and then you can learn from him. So I said to Jeff, I said, when I start beating you, I'm going to leave. So, I trained full time, and then end of the first year, I won like 4 divisions at the Nationals. And because there would have been nobody training the way I was training, coming from being a professional athlete and then literally training 6 or 8 hours a day on top of all my running and swimming and biking and yoga and weight training and everything else that I did. I was a bit of a weapon. So, when I turned up at the Nationals, there was nobody really doing that kind of stuff. So I blew through everybody pretty easily. I fought a couple of guys who were like nationally ranked judo guys, but again, they weren't used to, like, we were doing heel hooks and stuff and they weren't used to any of that, and leg attacks, and a lot of what we were doing was way outside of what they were used to. And then half of the tournament, there was kind of two tournaments going concurrently in the same place. And one was with striking and one was without. And I was in both of them. So I was in 4 divisions in 2 tournaments happening simultaneously in the same giant like basketball stadium. And so, yeah, I don't know how many fights I had a day, like 25, 30 fights a day, something like that. It was crazy. I remember I just had, again, big bag of muffins, and I had to remember it was Mountain Dew. I had a giant like 2 liter thing of Mountain Dew, and I literally just was on that all day, just Mountain Dew, Mountain Dew, Mountain Dew, just for more go juice. And so I came back after doing that, received my blue belt, and immediately got to work, training the same. Next year came, and by that stage, because I'd already told Jeff that I was interested in fighting in the UFC or Pride and stuff like that, we got a message from Pride Fighting Championship saying that they had a fight for me against Oleg Taktarov's number 2 guy. And Oleg was this Russian guy who was, early days of the UFC, liked leg locks apparently and stuff like. We had a few Russians training with us doing leg locks from day one, so like that wasn't unfamiliar. All the heel hooks, straight ankle locks, reverse heel hooks, all that stuff. We were doing that in '97, like as white belts, so like that wasn't a big deal. But Jeff said to me, he goes, I don't think you're going to go for it. And I go, why? And he goes, because they want you to throw the match. He goes, you can go to Japan, you can fight in Pride, you can fight Oleg's number 2 guy, but they want you to throw the match. And I was like, well, you already know what I'm going to say about that. And so he goes, yeah, I already told them no, because I knew what your answer would be. So that was, it didn't seem a world away from us that we could, go fight in Pride or fight in the UFC and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot of people worldwide doing what we were doing and into what we were into. And so second year, end of the second year, Nationals comes up again, and won all again, did the same thing again. 4 divisions in both tournaments. Won everything except I got a silver medal in one of them because I had a choke sunk in from the mount, and the guy rolled me over, so he got points for a turnover or something, and I had the choke on very tight, and when he stood up, he fell over, right? Not totally unconscious, but close. And then he got up, and they gave him the gold medal and me the silver medal. When it came to the medal ceremony, he gave me his gold medal. Yeah, and he goes, nah, he goes, because he was way bigger than me. He was easily 20, 30 kilos heavier than me. And he knows that if I didn't have to let go of that choke, that he would have been unconscious, and he didn't care about the point stuff either. So anyway, came back, and at that stage, there were a couple of guys who trained a lot who were really good, and when I started, they were a couple of years ahead of me. But I pretty quickly caught up on most of the guys, and I was starting to threaten Jeff, who was our coach. He'd won the Pan Ams as a blue belt, I guess, maybe purple, blue, and by that stage, I'd gone from like nearly 100 kilos to like 85 or something. I think I competed under 85 the second year. Maybe under 80, but I think it was under 85. And so yeah, I was starting to get close, and then I caught Jeff a couple of times. He wasn't real happy about that. Because every single day I would fight him. Every single day at the end of my whole day's training, every day I religiously would fight him. And I told him that. I said, I want to fight you every single day. I've been training for like 6 hours or 8 hours that day. And we had some enormous fights. Valentine's Day, 97 or 8. I'm going to say it's 98. And we were at it after class and neither of us was going to quit. Everybody had left the gym except for only his wife. And all the class had finished. He and I were still going. We had like a 2-hour fight. It was ridiculous. Just short of 2 hours. It went on forever, right? And then eventually Leone came over and just broke us up because like it was going to go until, I don't know, midnight or something. It was crazy. So, and we were both kind of upset about it. But I went to get my bike from the gym next door. The gym next door had shut. And so I had to get one of the guys or get Jeff or someone to call my girlfriend to get her to come pick me up because my bike was locked in the gym. I'd forgotten it was Valentine's Day. So I got in a ton of trouble, right? And so hence why I'll always remember that fight on Valentine's Day. So eventually some of my bike sponsors started sending me over to Australia. I'd come over and train in Perth, Sydney, Brisbane, wherever they had free tickets to and wherever I could find some jiu-jitsu, because it was very scarce back then, like very scarce. I remember getting a free ticket to Sydney. I had an address from the back of Blitz magazine, and I'd just literally get out of the plane into a taxi and go, take me here, and he would drive me there. And so he drove me to Anthony Lang's place in Sydney, and I knock on the door of his house, and his wife's like, you probably want Anthony, he's in the shed out the back. Go around the back, middle of summer in Sydney, it's super hot. I've come from New Zealand, I'm wearing a double thickness judo gi, yeah, and he's training in his like shed, and I like a little tin shed at the back of the house, and it was boiling. It was I'll never forget, it was so hot that like literally from side control, when he was pressuring my neck, I was almost passing out because of the heat. It was so bad. But that's what you'd have to do to be able to like go train jiu-jitsu with other places. And I went to Brisbane once. It was I could find the only guy in Brisbane was in a squash court. You turn up, there's just jigsaw mats in a squash court. You're like, wow, like there's other people doing jiu-jitsu here. This is amazing. If somebody was a blue belt or a purple belt, it was incredible. There's only a couple of purple belts. Eventually I came to Australia as a purple belt, and there was me and Tyrone Cross down in Melbourne. He and I became good friends. And there weren't many others. Maybe Ivan Radikic and maybe like Lance Dartnell at that stage. Close. Yeah, so very, very early days. So my experience of jiu-jitsu early on, and it was very common, was like literally you'd come in, and not everybody walking as arrogantly as what I did, but even so, you would get beaten up. Like their way of proving, because so few people, literally people had seen Gracie's in action, and then they would go find a jiu-jitsu place, and they would literally walk in and challenge them, right? Like that was the typical client, yeah? Basically calling BS on the school and challenge them and expecting that school to fight them like the Gracie challenger, And so like that was, I can see both sides. Patrons coming in basically challenging the school, so therefore the school gets like hyper defensive all the time and becomes even more aggressive as a way of almost like ensuring their safety. So when somebody comes in and says they want to train, they would literally beat the snot out of them to prove the art. So like so many people would leave just because they had a bad time and got beaten up, yeah, and then left. So like when Henna Gracie brought out Gracie University and the Gracie Garage, and you can learn at home and stuff like this, like I understood kind of how their gently approach, their modern approach and professional approach to, to students who want to learn, like you don't have to beat them up. You don't have to be that defensive. But when you are a blue belt running a part-time school maybe, and you get 110 kilo kickboxer comes in, and he's really aggressive, like what are you going to do? Like let him beat up all your students? Like you have to put the guy in his place. You have to teach him humility, and you have to get him to believe that jiu-jitsu is what you say it is, you know. And these days, obviously, with the proliferation of jiu-jitsu and the UFC, and you don't really get that anymore. I don't have to explain to people like, the most common thing was I had to explain the difference between Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Japanese jiu-jitsu, and the difference between judo and that, and aikido, and because people just had no idea about what it was. So I'd have to explain what it was. And I could say, because I've done all these other martial arts, and I'm like, well, it's kind of like a marriage of like karate and judo, right? And wrestling and yoga. Imagine that mix, right? And yeah, it's really interesting. It was an interesting time, you know. Eventually, I got involved with Helson Gracie and Hoyle through visiting Helson in Hawaii, and clicked very well with a lot of the Gracie guys, because I was kind of teaching myself jiu-jitsu for the longest time, and then kind of growing up in New Zealand in this culture of fighting as opposed to sport. Like, tournaments were like not really much of a focus because nobody really did jiu-jitsu, but once a year we'd go to the national jiu-jitsu champs. There'd be judokas there'd be like Japanese jiu-jitsu guys, and then there'd be like some spatterings of other arts that kind of do a bit of grappling and jiu-jitsu guys. So it was pretty interesting. And so once I got to Australia, and I came here on my way, I'd contacted Ken Shamrock at the Lions Den, and I said, look, I want to come over and do this, but I want to, you know, because that was the first kind of MMA gym in the world. And so that's what my focus was, and that was going to be my ticket into the UFC. But I wanted to improve my grappling. Yeah, I didn't want to be a big fish in a small bowl. I was that in New Zealand, and then I wanted to get better. I'd got to Australia and realised, like, wow, like there's some really good jiu-jitsu guys here, which is exactly what I'm after. But again, in Melbourne, everybody was kind of very sport focused. There weren't a lot of guys. In fact, there was probably no one doing what we'd been doing in New Zealand, which was headbutting each other and beating the snot out of each other, and really trying to fight like we saw in the UFC, the way that we thought that the martial arts should be. So I felt a little bit odd in Melbourne. I mean, it was a nice city, freezing cold, but yeah, I also saw, you know, the opportunity for, you know, I wasn't thinking about opening a school. I'll do another video on that another time. But eventually I did end up teaching and end up owning quite a few schools. So yeah, it was just different. It was a different vibe coming from New Zealand to Melbourne. Melbourne, there was like almost no violence. There was some like high level kind of gang mafia stuff going on that you kind of heard about a bit. But there wasn't the like physical violence on a day to a day and all the threat that I saw and experienced in New Zealand. So I felt very kind of safe and kind of comfortable in Melbourne. You know, you could walk down the street, nobody would like glare at you or give you an eye or bump your shoulder or want to fight you, which was really common in New Zealand. Everyone just seemed more concerned about fancy coffees and looking good and how much money they made rather than fighting. So it was a bit odd for me. So that's kind of my early days of jiu-jitsu. Obviously did a lot of martial arts leading up to that, which helped me, you know, kind of be better at it faster, I guess. Plus, you know, like dedicating an enormous amount of time and energy to it early on certainly helped. So you don't have to do that. With most of my students, I'm happy to see them 2 or 3 times a week. You know, if the, you know, like for the first 6 months, if they train twice a week, awesome. If they pick up a 3rd day a year later or something, awesome. Like that's great. You know, if they do a little bit of gym work and they run a couple of times a week, do jiu-jitsu twice a week, maybe 3 times later, awesome. Yeah, sure, I've got some guys that are on the mat 4, 5 days a week, that sort of thing. But it's pretty rare, you know, that would be less than 5% of the club. So realizing where the majority of people are, then my expectations for them also have to be moderated, because there is a part of my brain that wants, you know, like 40-minute warm-ups and to drill everybody into the ground and be very, very military in my approach towards it. But that's not for everybody, you know, and they can move on to that later if they wish. There's always gloves at the gym if the guys want to put the gloves on, you know, but it's, we've got a different crowd doing jiu-jitsu these days. Everyone really loves the exercise part of it's really interesting for them mentally. I see enormous changes in people's self-esteem, you know, so I think that they know that it's a good self-defense system, and they all rate like making friends, losing weight, getting healthier and fitter, stronger and more flexible and stuff like that. Like that's what marketing says that people really want out of it, you know. And for a lot of people, I think especially guys in their 40s, you know, during their 20s, they're kind of, you know, chasing girls and carrying on, and then career gets kind of serious in your 30s. Similar, by the time you're like 40, you should have your career kind of pretty sorted for a lot of guys. And 40 to 45, they can get kind of complacent, you know, got some money coming in, bills are getting paid, can afford the occasional car every couple of years, you know, and so you're not in that survival mindset anymore. You're not in that, like, you know, I guess testosterone driven competitiveness. And so you get a little bit complacent. You're like, well, I've got a wife, she's not going anywhere. She doesn't care if I have a little bit of belly fat. I'll have a couple of beers. I'll eat a bit of McDonald's here because I'm not chasing girls. I don't need a six pack. And that complacency over your late 30s, early 40s really catches up with you. And then one day they just figure out, like, I don't feel good, you know. Maybe things are strained with the marriage a little bit, you know, but you've both kind of, you know, found your way out of the railway lines, the tracks that kind of brought you together, for example, you know, that she liked the fact you were this like kind of fit, kind of healthy guy who was really driven and you know, and you liked her because of this, and then you kind of drift away from that. And then I see a lot of couples kind of struggling a bit, and I think it's both of their responsibilities to look after themselves and realize that, like, there is more to you than the marriage itself. Is that for the marriage of the two of you to be healthy, then the two of you need to be individually healthy. So the way I always explain it is that, like, you've got your life and she's got her life, and then you meet to have the relationship. So if you two are the relationship like this, and you don't have your separateness, your own hobbies, your own passions, your own desires and things that you want to achieve, and you've stopped kind of growing yourself and just kind of fallen into this area of complacency and laziness and stuff like that, it comes up to bite you in the butt. And so I think guys really struggle with that. I know they do, because I see them all the time. You know, they come to the gym, they're 15 kilos overweight, life's got pretty boring, there's no challenges, they started drinking too much, eating too much. They realize they need to get fit and healthy. They might even have a health scare, that's pretty common. They get their annual checkup or whatever, and then the doctor goes, hey man, like, you know, like you're pre-diabetic, or, you know, like your heart's not doing great, or your blood pressure's kind of high. You should start exercising. And they start thinking about it, like, what should I do about that? And they start thinking, oh, maybe I'll go to the gym. So maybe they join the gym. But then, oh, the gym's kind of boring, and you kind of have to self-motivate, and I kind of like not that into it, you know. Everyone's kind of there posing and got their bloody cameras out and stuff. You know, it might not be their vibe. And then so they start trying to jog a little bit, and then, oh, my dodgy knee's playing up, you know, it's cold, it's raining, whatever it happens to be. And then they kind of go through the process of figuring out what they, you know, they see an ad or whatever, they watch the UFC or something, like, oh yeah, like that'd be kind of cool, but I don't really like fancy getting punched in the face. You know, the whole full MMA thing isn't really for me, but I could, you know, like maybe Jiu Jitsu, like that might be kind of cool. I see things on that all the time online. And so they kind of go down that rabbit hole, and then they come to the gym, and, you know, so like knowing that they're walking in with a suboptimal body, they might have some health stuff going on. Like, it's not my job to put them through the ringer and destroy them, because it's not going to help them. They're likely going to, like have an injury, which is the last thing we want them to do. And we want them to have a good time and kind of ease into it nice and slowly. Even just drilling for most people. For 3 months, they can just drill. And they'll still wake up sore the next day just from drilling movements and doing a few hip outs and occasionally some sit-ups and stuff like that. Nothing crazy. But like, they will slowly get into it. And then once they get through those first 3 months and their body kind of gets used to it, they've already started to lose a little bit of weight and they're kind of excited by that. And then the bug bites them, I might do another class a week. Like, I'm feeling pretty good now. Like, twice a week, I was still feeling beaten up. But a few months later, now their body's starting to get used to it and recover. So like, maybe I'll do a Saturday class, like I'll do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So then they hit me up and hey, I'm thinking of doing the Saturday. Awesome, come along to Saturday class. They have a great time. And then they're kind of into it. And my job takes over, and it's my job to ensure that I give people a fair and good start and to not push them too hard, just, a little bit. If I see people slacking, I'll put my foot in their butt just a little bit. Hey man, I know you can do a little bit more than that, you don't have to wait. If the guys are doing rounds, for example, when they're sparring, and somebody's sitting out like a few too many, then I might, hey, come on, get in there, like, let's get this going. It's like, okay, let's go, So like some gentle encouragement, and I certainly don't pressure people to even have to roll. But after 3 months or so, they usually get curious and their body is adapted and then they're kind of ready to start wrestling and stuff like that. They're welcomed. If you're walking in the gym, you're kind of athletic, you don't have too many niggling injuries, and you have, really good self-confidence. If you want to start rolling straight away, then you're welcome. But I'll put you with one of the high grades, one of the real mellow guys, so that, you don't get too competitive and just nurse you into it slowly. So things have definitely changed in that respect, because the way that things were going, you wouldn't have students. Yeah, like it was way too harsh. Only the alpha types would stay. Like I reckon 80% of the first like 5 or 6 guys I trained with, all of them are black belts, have their own schools, stuff like that. Because if you could survive being at the Academy of Combat for years, then you have what it takes to go all the way, for sure. Anyway, that's the start of my jiu-jitsu career. If you'd like me to expand on any particular area that I've experienced, then hit me up in the comments, and I'm happy to chat. I'm happy to help other people, especially those who are just starting, or maybe those considering doing jiu-jitsu. Maybe they've done other martial arts and they're like curious about how it kind of fits in with what they already do, because it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like you can put a lot of other martial arts with jiu-jitsu. In fact, I would encourage that. If you do karate, we'll do jiu-jitsu as well and make yourself more complete. If you do wrestling, we'll do jiu-jitsu as well, because like then, when you stick your head in a particular place, where maybe in wrestling you don't get it grabbed and headlocked and choked, then like it might change some of the positioning that you do. I know my footwork for MMA had to change coming from my other striking arts, because I was standing way too tall. My legs were way too susceptible for double legs. Sometimes I'd stand too side on, which would make me, more vulnerable to leg kicks. When you're more square on, then there's other, obviously you're a slightly bigger target. So, yeah, just let me know. Anyway, that's almost 40 minutes worth of me talking. I'm sure you're sick of it. Have a great day, stay safe, and enjoy your jiu-jitsu.